Yup, Pokey26 here, and I am going over another patch notes review for Warcraft 3, but this is, rather than actual patch notes from Blizzard, it's patch suggestions from the community, including top players, as well as like endorsed by Back to Warcraft, shown on their stream, etc. And just kind of my take as someone who's alright at the game, but not necessarily a pro player. So, first off, goals for the suggestions. I can briefly read through this, but basically make human less susceptible to early mid-game harass from elf. Okay, I think that's fine. Slightly tune down the power of certain elements of night elf late game army versus human. I guess that's a thing that can be done. That being said, I personally believe human late game army is actually stronger than night elf late game army. It's just that humans generally don't go tier 3 and humans lose to the heroes, not the units. Which, yeah. I don't think it's right to necessarily say elf army should be weakened. But it can make sense in the context if it's just like certain elements of it, rather than saying it's not necessarily saying night elf's army is necessarily better, just certain elements of it are difficult for the human to deal with. So I can understand that. Tune down the tier 3 power spike of human. I think that's good to keep in mind so that they don't crush undead. Humans are already starting to do pretty good against undead, I think, recently anyways, as is. Increase overall potency of orcs slightly, very slightly, it says. I think that's fine. But I do believe orc is generally pretty strong. They just have a couple vulnerable moments, or like moments where if they're caught out, they can be in just a rough spot. Wider variety of strategies for Orkmere. Definitely not at the forefront of things you want in balanced patch, but can be good to keep in mind. The mirror matchups, you don't want them to be boring or stagnant. Same with undead having like mass destroyers lately. Address Night Elf versus undead by tuning down the power of Ghoul Frenzy timing and undead slow effects. I do think those are good things to keep in mind in this matchup. Rework Banshees so that mirror is less one-dimensional, meaning Banshees are used more, but also that pure mass Banshees are less viable, which has to do with possession. Don't want to over-nerf undead, of course, especially as it is the least played race to begin with, I believe. Item drop tail more interesting and balanced, okay. Streamline builds and increase usability for underused units and abilities. I think this can be good, but you always got to be careful with this because you don't know if there's going to be more patches in Warcraft, right? And if there's not more patches, you don't necessarily want to overbuff something that's just going to stay overbuffed forever. Improve quality of life. Okay, so let's get into it. I believe many of these changes are, basically the changes originally brought out by Blizzard, and then the ones that are bad are mentioned to either just don't implement it or how it could be changed. So we'll look over them quickly. Move Ring of Protection +3 from level 1 to 2, and remove Ring +4 from the item table. I also think this is pretty good change. I do think, as their reasoning says, there were too many Rings of Protection, and it is honestly one of the things that makes Night Elf the strongest currently, is the fact that Rings of Protection help Night Elf more than other races, because you're oftentimes playing Demon Hunter and you want the Demon Hunter to tank, and so rings provide that. Whereas other races, like with Archmage and Lich and so on, they just want damage. They want claws, they want circlets, they want gloves of haste. and they just want to poke at you, potentially get expos up and so on. And so when they're getting less of those and you're getting rings, it makes it easier for the DH to do what he wants and harass. That being said, with this change in mind, I think you also have to be careful when you're nerfing something like immolation later. So we'll keep that in mind later when we get to it. Move circlet from 3 to 2, I think that's good. And then they want to do 1 to all stats plus 1 to main hero attribute. This is also the exact thing I mentioned like forever ago. I don't know, half a year ago or whatever it was. Decrease gold, that's probably just keep in line with the other ones. But yeah, if they can do that, if they can have +1 to main hero attribute while still having +1 to the other stats, I think that's fine. Clause of attack from +4 to +5, I think that is also good. But I also do think it's less needed when you're getting rid of the extra rings that were in the pool. But it's still fine at plus if they move it to +5, so I don't hate that. Move crystal ball from level 3 to 2. They say do not implement. I also kind of agree. But I do think crystal ball could actually be moved to the consumable camps. So the ones that give sentry ward, wand of illusion, and replenishment potion used to give lightning shield. I think crystal ball could be moved to that, but also be a consumable item rather than a repeated use every minute item. So if you just had crystal ball have 3, 4, 5 charges, whatever, it could be worth, and people would actually use it there as well. You would see a lot less people sell it, and it would actually be used, which I think is kind of what you want for crystal ball. Whereas currently it's kind of a, you use it once, get the reveal, you potentially use it again if you don't make it to a shop yet after the cooldown, and then you sell it. So that's generally how it functions currently. So maybe making it a actual consumable could be better. I don't know. But that's not what their changes were, but my suggested that I have previously mentioned in other videos. Decrease the cost of periapt. I think that's just to keep it in line, which is fine. Staff of teleportation, 2 charges. Tone retraining, 2 charges. Those are fine and good. But here they do a lot of Fire Lord discussion and Fire Lord changes. Decrease cast point time. Personally, I haven't noticed the need for this, but if people think it's actually something worthwhile that needs to be changed, okay. I don't know how this matches up to other heroes, etc., but okay. Incinerate, mana cost. My initial thoughts were this is not even that big of a deal, because Incinerate's kind of bad overall. But it is possible that 2 mana is just too cheap, because that is pretty cheap. So 5 or 4 is probably better to go with, is at least at first, and you can see how it works out. The lava spawn, they say do not implement, which I agree as well. Like if they were going to do something with lava spawn, I believe a reduced mana cost would have been better than a hit requirement. You know, make lava spawns 130 mana or something like that. Because 150 mana is pretty expensive for a Agi hero. Then we got Soulburn. They want it to be undispellable. I actually had at one point in the game thought Soulburn was undispellable, but I think that's because I was mixing it up with like Dota or something. But yeah, they mention undispellable here, and I personally don't think that's the right way to buff Soulburn. It could be okay, but it's very questionable. Maybe it's okay. Like when you think of, I don't know, I think the problem with making Soulburn undispellable is that it's not a like targeted. There's no how do I want to say this? There's no like time on like projectile time or like a targeted AoE that you could potentially miss or anything like that. You just click on the target and it goes on there and boom, they're soul burned, which makes having it be undispellable pretty powerful because it's just kind of like almost, you know, instant, right? Just a little bit of cast point time here, but they wanted to make that faster as well. So I think I don't like it being undispellable because of how fast it is. You know, it's not something you can dodge like a coil in the air. It's not something that the user can miss like a silence if they cast the silence in the wrong spot. So I think undispellable is not the right way, and instead I think lower mana cost, similar to how I think lava spawns could be buffed. Lower mana cost or faster cooldown or something like that would be better if they were to change Soulburn. But yeah, they're just kind of mentioning a possible direction. Those would be my possible directions: mana cost or cooldown. Volcano damage, they say do not implement. I also kind of agree. I was mentioning this on my video, but also when talking about the Blade Storm potential changes, that I don't really like skills like Volcano that are doing damage to buildings and so on to get huge damage buffs, because then you can oftentimes see them just use this to siege supply buildings. With 150 damage, you know, you get like 4 procs of this and you will literally wipe all the moonwells in an area. And if the elf has like a group of 4 moonwells or something, you know, that might just be 4 moonwells gone. Or same with farms, you might wipe like 7 farms or 4 ziggurats or burrows or whatever. So it's very questionable to have it that strong where it can do that much damage super fast. But I do think this is fine. Reducing mana cost and cooldown is a better way to buff these ultimates that are not necessarily super good, but now have more viability because you're getting them quicker and at less cost. So that's fine. Mana shield activation cost reduced. I think that's good. I still don't think it'll be used much, but that's definitely helpful. And then Tinker changes. I don't particularly think Tinker even needs buffs. He's seen plenty of use in multiple matchups, particularly from Elf and Undead, I guess. But yeah, I don't really like buffing him. But I don't think these buffs are necessarily game breaking either. So it's kind of whatever. And then here, so I thought these were talking about like the springtime mercenaries or something, maybe like when you're buying mercenaries, but maybe it's actually talking about camps like the middle marketplace camp on Northern Isles when they're attacking you, and how they are aggroing things that they shouldn't be, and you can't re-aggro them properly, and so on. So maybe this makes sense. I don't know how to talk about that more, but yeah, if that's what it's for, is to fix creeps and how they're aggroing, and it's not consistent with other stuff or whatever, then I guess it's fine. Decrease the duration of frost armor slow effect from creeps, I believe, is that's probably good. I do think that should be lowered. Mostly benefits non-night elf, I guess. But yeah, I think it's good. to do. And now we'll go to human. So Archmage, they want to essentially give Archmage different stat lines, which will result in Archmage having 25 extra health at level 2, and then -1 int at level 6. So basically, Archmage essentially just gets 25 extra health. I don't particularly think this is needed, but I don't particularly think it's bad either. Humans are very greedy with wanting to have everything super good in the early. They're like, buff my towers, buff my peasants, buff my Archmage. Meanwhile, they are getting an expansion in any matchup they want while creeping in the face of their opponent. So it's like, do they need those? Like, should we be giving them an easier time? It's hard to say for me, but I don't think this is necessarily bad. So it's probably fine. Like, not gonna particularly break the game probably. So yeah, because it's only 25 HP. So now we got the Mountain King bash changes. And the Paladin aura changes. And they say don't implement on both. Personally, I felt the bash bonus damage change by itself wasn't really a big deal. Because I feel like you would still grab Bolt on level 5 anyways. So you never see this bash unless the Mountain King's like level 7. Or potentially 6 if they forego Avatar, I guess. But thinking about it, there maybe is some viability in this, in which case maybe it is also better to have like a smaller change, which yeah, I think this change would be fine. 25, 35, 50 I think is plenty. It's a way to buff Mountain King without really buffing Mountain King, because it's not going to affect much. And then the Devotion Hour change. This is also the exact change I was saying, that if they are going to buff it, it should be 246, not 346 or 369 or whatever they were going to do before. But personally, I don't think they even need to, and if they are, 246 is plenty. Blood Mage. So I hate Blood Mage buffs, but the channel time one, that's fine. The reduced mana cost, I'm not sure. Like, Blood Mage is already stealing your mana anyways, so he should kind of have this high mana cost on Flame Strike. And I think one of the problems with making Flame Strike less mana is it incentivizes more Blood Mage building, killing, hit and run style rather than actually using it in fights. Because if you're using it in fights, you're generally going to be siphoning mana off and having mana for the Flame Strike anyways. But if you're using it for hit and runs, you're not always getting those siphons, right? You're just kind of using what mana you have. And so I think that's the problem here, is this just incentivizes more of that play, and I don't particularly like that being the case. But I don't hate the channel time being less. I think that's fine. There should be more often the Blood Mage can get the spell off without getting like interrupted in his channeling. Militia duration. They say a cautious approach could be better. I also agree. I think 42.5 is plenty. But if it was 45, I think it's still fine. I do think 42.5 would be better though, which was their Blizzard's initial proposal before they changed it in version 2 to 45. Arcane Tower, reducing tower feedback. I think that's good. It's only a partial revert to the previous state it was in, I believe, but I still think it's good. Reduce the build time. I think since it's only 5 seconds, it's probably fine. As long as it's not like guard towers and stuff, of course, getting reduced. But there's always a worry with making towers stronger because of potential, mass towers in your own base or tower rushes and stuff like that make the gameplay a lot less interesting for many players. But I do think overall this is probably fine. Especially if the feedback's getting lowered back down, we can deal with 5 seconds quicker. Footmen defend, piercing damage reduction. It's a very small nerf, but I welcome it as Night Elf, I guess. Generally speaking, this doesn't change anything because they still got their reflect. It's still going to stop most of the piercing damage. The footmen are still dying to heroes and spells anyways, but it helps, I guess. Remove the Knight Sunray Blades ability. I think that is probably good, especially because they want to essentially buff humans in other ways, and if they're buff humans in other ways, they definitely don't want the Sunray Blades anymore because it's mostly used against undead to begin with, and humans are not doing too bad against undead currently, so removing it is probably good. I am curious if this means removing it completely or making it an upgrade again where you can research it. But I believe they want to actually remove it completely, which I'm not sure if I agree with removing it completely, because I do think there's still situations late game where you would want Sundering Blades against like mountain giants, for instance. Otherwise, without Sundering Blades, it's possible the elf army is actually quite strong against the human army late game, on top of elves generally having higher level heroes because they're able to creep more against the current human strategy. So I wouldn't hate it to still be at least a researchable ability. You could always have the cost increased for that as well, or research time, etc., if needed. Food provided by Keep and Castle. So they want to remove the castle one where castle moves it from 14 to 16. That way it lines up for the 50 and 80 food, which I don't hate. The castle one that moves it to 16 food actually lines up to the 100 food mark better, but I don't think that's as important as the 50 and 80 food marks. So this is probably better, and it's fine. 2 extra food for human, whatever. You can deal with it. And then they want reduced cast time for priests. And then the increased cooldown for priest heal just to compensate for that. It's also fine. I think overall these are fine. Much better than what Blizzard proposed, but still things I would slightly change. Like I do still think the 42.5 would be better here for militia time. I think Flame Strike doesn't need to be lower mana, but the channel time, that's fine. Overall, I would say solid for human changes. I'll move on to orc changes. And orc changes here is all buffs, including new buffs, which worries me a bit that orcs getting like just purely buffs. Bladestorm damage, they say slight increase from 110 to 120 and add mana cost reduction. I do think that's probably better. I was previously mentioning on the proposed patch that rather than the 160 or 140, I think 130 would have been fine, but reduced mana cost and only a slight damage increase is probably even better. Because you don't want Bladestorm to be a like solo blade hit and run into level 6 blade that Bladestorms down buildings on top of the hit and run with bats or wyvern or raiders, etc. you don't want that sort of gameplay to get promoted too much. So I think reducing mana cost rather than completely buffing the damage is a good way to go about that. Same with when we were talking about Volcano previously. Headhunter hit point reverting the change, I think it's also good. They agree too. Now here, they are actually saying research time is too strong and they suggest decreasing totem build time. I don't like the decreasing totem build time, but I don't actually know, does it actually have a different build time than things like Bestiary and Lodge? Like, does it take longer than those? In which case, maybe that's the right call. That being said, I actually think it's better to go with the faster Adept and Master and not the faster build time. And I think it's actually just fine for Orc that way, because now their first 3 walkers with Adept training still build in the same amount of time that you would have if you did it this way compared to my way. But it also means your Adept training hits quicker for your first and second walker. So right out the gate, you can dispel pesky things on tier 2, like Entangle and whatever, which means you have the option to go walkers instead of shaman in certain areas if you choose. So I think actually having the training time lower rather than the build time would be better. But I do believe one or the other is kind of the choice, and that's what they went with as well. Now here, this is a completely new change being offered, and I don't really like all of this. I do think Witch Doctors are one of the least used units in the entire game. Apart from, sometimes they'll be used for like sentry wards, I guess. But I really don't like making them too strong, because I don't think giving the ability to go to heal wards super easily is a good idea. So if anything, if they are going to buff Witch Doctors, which they probably can use a buff since they aren't really used, I think the better option would be to remove this third line, which is the master training getting reduced research time. I think heal ward should still be locked behind a longer research time. But if you wanted to have faster adept training and faster build time by 2 seconds, that's probably reasonable. I don't know. It's hard to tell for me. There's not enough experience in what it's like to go Witch Doctors to know exactly how to buff it properly. But I think a smaller step with just the build time and adept training first would be better than also including the master training. Because I don't think it would be good if master training got used too often. Especially now with humans not having breaker spell steal until tier 3, so they can't steal the heal wards. And elves also having a tough time against heal wards if they actually get them going. I don't think this buff is. I don't know. I don't know. Realistically, it's probably fine because orcs generally aren't going tier 3 anyways against human and night elf. But there's always that worry where something happens and they do, and it's a little scary to see heal wards everywhere, and then you got this orc army that's just not dying, and the heal wards are hard to deal with. So it's worrisome, but it might actually be fine anyway. And then they're also getting all their research reduced wood costs. So overall, orcs getting quite a lot of buffs. It might be fine. I do wonder if it's too much, but that's why we're taking out certain parts, right? Like they want to take out the Adept and Master. I personally would take out the build time instead on the walkers. Maybe the Witch Doctor, like I said, maybe not have the Master one, the Master training. And then you're looking at this list being only, you know, still quite a lot of buffs, but a few less that makes it reasonable. And I think that'd be reasonable for Orc, especially because the other races are getting like partial buffs and some nerfs and stuff too. So yeah, that'd be my proposal: is get rid of the master training and then switch this around for the walkers. But otherwise, I think it's good. So overall, I'm fairly similar line of thinking as what these have shown. And now here in Night Elf, they're saying do not implement the damage one, but keep the mana cost one. I am a little worried about the mana cost being increased all the way to 10 for initial activation cost. So personally, I would rather see it at 5 still, as was proposed in the first Blizzard version, and then maybe still have the damage reduced to 5.5 on level 1. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe Immolation is still just fine on 10 mana. That being said, in a lot of my games, I am actually investing in a third Moonwell before even decking. And oftentimes, after using all 3 Moonwells at some point, my DH is still at like 80% health and 50% mana. I'm getting an extra camp in and I'm much quicker to level and so on, but it is costing me a lot to do that, right? Like it's not like this immolation creeping is free. You're taking more damage than you would if you were pulling and using evasion, but you're able to get like an extra camp in, which has its value, but that extra camp also means that you're activating immolation more. And so this 10 mana cost is suddenly adds up to 30 or 40 mana for just the creeping, and then you go to the harass, has another 10 mana. Like late game, it doesn't really matter. It's mostly just how good. I guess I don't know. It's probably fine if they're not implementing the damage one, I guess. But I would have liked to see it at 5 first, rather than 10 for the initial cost. But at 10, it's probably fine. It's just you got to be a little careful, especially in high ping servers or accidental immolation clicks, etc., where you turn it on, you turn it off, and then you're like, oh no, now I have to turn it back on because I didn't mean to turn it off, and suddenly you've lost 20 mana for that. It's like there's plenty of people that have this immolation where you see it turned on and off when they didn't mean to, because it just isn't always, how to put it, like the best response timing, particularly because of ping and lag and whatever, or just misclicks. There's a lot of ways where sometimes it screws up and you'll have this activation cost added on for no reason, reducing your mana further or whatever. So here they talk about the blink cooldown. They say a small change. I also kind of agreed. I think level 2 here, going from 7 to 5, is like pretty crazy, because blink also has a reduced mana cost already that is not shown here because it's just staying the same. So it goes from 50 mana to 10 mana, and they wanted the cooldown to be half the cooldown from 10 to 5. So yeah, I do kind of agree that a smaller change would be better here. 963, probably fine. It's reasonable. I am curious here what they mean by Fan of Knives buffs are too strong and Warden positioning itself in the fight to hit all targets, etc. And then their proposed changes, in my opinion, this change here is actually stronger for Warden than this change. The change up top matters against huge food armies of either rifle mortar caster or Gargs in particular, those types of armies. But Warden doesn't care as much about that. Warden wants to get off to a hot start by just picking off the initial units, the initial foodies or ghouls or whatever, and sometimes they're not even using fan there, they're using Shadow Strike. Same with against peasants and stuff. And if they are using fan, this doesn't change much of that. So I'm curious why they think this one is stronger. Because personally, I believe actual Warden players would much rather have this change here. That being said, I think this change is pretty reasonable and good. They could maybe add like 5 more damage to level 2. And I don't know about an extra 5 to the level 3 fan, but I think 5 to level 2 fan could be reasonable. Because 125 for a skill that costs, is it 100 mana or is it only 90 mana? I can't even remember now. It might actually only be 90 mana right now. But for 125 damage for that is actually not too crazy compared to the other AoE skills, I believe. Like most of the other AoE skills are at least 125, if not like 130, 135, etc. So I don't. And the other ones hit more targets, and some of them hit buildings and mechanical. So I think I wouldn't hate at least the level 2 one to get buffed to 130. That being said, I think this change would be good for fan, and the blink change with the 963 would probably be good. I do agree that I don't think this is a good change, but I don't agree that it's too strong. I just think it's bad design for fan. Because Warden's not currently used in this method until Warden has already done its damage anyways and got level 6. So on. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I would say this would be good, and that's what they're saying too. So okay. Starfall. These are probably good. I do think Starfall lasts way too long. Increasing the damage is likely fine. Here, I actually prefer if Mana Flare got nerfed through range rather than damage, because I think reducing the range causes both sides, both the elf player and the opponent, to micro more, whereas reducing the damage does not. The elf doesn't have to micro as much because they don't have to micro into the range as much. And the other race probably has to micro more because of the range anyways, right? So I think this change is actually better in my opinion. But I do think one or the other is likely both fine. Like Fairy Dragon, Mana Flare is still going to be good. You're still going to want them in your late game armies versus human, etc. Maybe reducing the damage is better. I don't know. There are some times where the damage, like you accidentally get hit by it or something, and you're just like, oh, that was so painful because of the 100 damage. So maybe having a less painful hit is better. They say do not implement the claw one. I do think this change doesn't really matter much. I was fine with them implementing it, but if they don't, it's also fine. So this is fine. I am glad that they're saying to not implement the Talon one. I agree. I think the Talons don't need an increased cost. And this is something I didn't mention in the patch notes videos, but I've thought about before, is that crows, when you get crows from adept training, you should be able to get the apply fairy fire in crow form as well, but you normally need master training, which is kind of bad for that. Personally, I still think talons should be reverted back to magic damage in crow form as well instead of piercing, but it's not discussed here, I guess. Overall, the elf changes, I think they're okay. But I do wonder how good immolation is at 10 mana cost rather than something like 5. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it just starts to get ignored again and you see more mana burn plus evasion play. In fact, there's already some games where I've seen mana burn evasion and immolation was skipped to begin with. So it's possible that this is the type of thing where immolation just goes to the side again. You'll see it every now and then, but the elf might just prioritize mana burn plus evasion again. I don't know. We'll see. But maybe that's good. Maybe that's what people would want. I think realistically, I would like to see, or I don't know if it's realistic considering Blizzard, but I would like to see the 5 mana cost instead of 10. But maybe the realistic is Blizzard might not implement more changes, so maybe just going 10 from the start is better. Yeah. Anyways, on to Undead. So this is what I like, is they actually addressed the Lich, which Blizzard has not done in 5 million years. So they want slow duration on Frost Nova reduced. This will still allow Frost Nova to do the same damage as before, but now it's not slowing potentially an entire army as well as heroes for ever. Literally forever, because I think it was like 8-second cooldown, 8-second slow on the max level one, and then 6-second slow on heroes as well. Now it's like 4 seconds on max level, which, considerable difference, and I think that's a good change. I do wonder if the level 1 slow should be, or I do wonder if it should be like 4 seconds on all levels for units, and then like 2, 3, 4 on heroes. But yeah, it's something there nerfed for the Lich would be good, because Lich has been one of the stronger all-around heroes for quite a long time. Because Frost Nova as well as Frost Armor are incredibly powerful, and then you have Ritual to synergize with Frost Nova if you have Lich first. So you have like infinite Frost Nova. It gets kind of crazy. And then they are buffing the Lich in a different way with reduced Death and Decay, mana cost, and duration, which it's fine. I think so. I think Lich will still skip Death and Decay because of how good the other skills are. Like, you would generally rather have 3 Nova, 1 Frost Armor, 2 Ritual than Death and Decay, even at this, unless you know you're going to siege right away with this. There's something you need to siege with Death and Decay. In which case, the next one, where it doesn't affect undead units, also probably doesn't matter. I don't think you care about that, because you don't care about using against units particularly. But I guess that's what they want. Their proposed change is to try to get Death and Decay somehow used in fights, or just used more in general. But personally, I think it's still going to be ignored, so these are not as important to look at. Here, they say the Crypt Lord changes to just do not implement. I personally don't think this one, the Carapace damage return, is a big deal if they did implement it. But I do think this one should not be implemented. I agree. And then yeah, this one can be ignored as well. This, however, I'm very skeptical about. This seems kind of crazy, having spiked carapace on beetles, where they get extra armor and they get the return damage. It's, I don't know. I don't know if it's too much in certain matchups in the early to mid game with the level 1 and level 2 beetles early on against, even in mirror or against human or orc when they have a lot of melee. It's questionable to do this. Like, if given the choice, I'd probably rather just implement this change and not the others. That being said, okay, so that being said, if the undead does go for this beetle buff, this is meaning that they're foregoing impale. But there are situations like in Undead Mirror where that's not even bad because the undead might be going Maskargs or something against the Crypt Lord. So, but it's Undead Mirror, so maybe it's not a big deal. You can theoretically play the same builds in Mirror. I don't know. I don't know how to judge this. It's kind of weird, but it is kind of interesting. I'm sure people would have fun with it. But I do wonder if it's too strong in certain situations or not to have all of your beetles having these buffs as well. Because you got to remember, even though you're foregoing Impale in order to get this Spiked Carapace, that also means you're saving more mana, which means you have more mana to use on the beetles, because you're no longer using mana anywhere else on the Crypt Lord. So you're having more beetles, and these beetles are buffer, stronger, whatever. And I think that makes it questionable of a change. And then the Ruby and Tower change, I think that's good. They agree. And now we got a Frenzy Ghoul change. They want to reduce the attack rate and increase the research time, which is pretty huge. I'm not sure. Like, it's probably good, especially if Undead's getting some of these other changes that are buffs. But I was wondering if maybe research time still should stay the same and just the attack rate should be lowered. Something like that. I don't know. Let's say do not implement on this change. I do think that's probably good. You don't really want fiends to be able to kite better by having better turn rate. Raised Dead, they say do not implement. That was also the big thing I was saying, and that did not get changed by Blizzard. Both the version 1 and version 2 had this still. And I agree here with the Back to Warcraft crew and the community that it should not be implemented. The mana cost, 50% cheaper mana cost, is crazy for Raised Dead. But like they pointed out, these are actually reasonable. Like you can have these changes. But the Raised Dead mana cost, you do not want mana to be too cheap for Raised Dead. So yeah, this one should be removed. Same as I had said in previous videos. Banshee Anti-Magic Shell. So this one's completely new compared to Blizzard's changes. And it makes it undispellable again, which it used to be previously, in exchange for lower damage blocked. And I believe that's probably good, particularly to prevent the mass destroyer undead mirror nonsense, because you'll see banshees used more often again in that matchup then. And then this is the big one, improved visibility for possession. I also think that should be a thing. I'm not sure what the best way for this is, if it should have a tether similar to Life Drain and Siphon. Like if there should be some sort of tether like that. But yeah. that would be huge. Because currently, one of the biggest problems with possession is once you hear it go off, and then you're spending seconds, like multiple seconds, just to determine where it's coming from and what it's targeting and how you can deal with it. And then you've dealt with it and you're like, wait, there's still 3 others or 4 other 5 other banshees doing the same thing, and then you still lose like 4 knights or 4 bears or whatever, and you're like, why? So yeah, improved visibility would help here. It's a way to keep possession still strong, like it's still the same mana cost, it still does the same thing, still has the same cast time, but now you can actually see it happening, which I think is something that should have been in the game for a long time. Here is weird. So they just label this as a buff. I was mentioning previously, I think the collision size in some situations is actually a nerf to have smaller A-bombs. Because oftentimes the A-bomb's purpose is to block the opponent off. And so you actually want higher collision size, I believe, so that units aren't passing by them. But there's also situations where it's a buff. If you can get an extra A-bomb in your line because of it, then I guess it's a buff. But yeah, it's a weird change. I think the turn rate, yeah, that's fine. The collision size, I'm unsure of if it's good or not. This would be good. Make it work like defense. You can toggle it properly on all of them, so they're synchronized. And then here we got some frostworm changes. I'm not sure if this is needed, as frostworms, I believe, are potentially the most used of frostworm, chimera, tauren. They're still below bears, knights, griffins, the 4 food ones. But of the 7 and 5 food units, I think frostworms might still be used the most anyways. Unless chimeras are used more. But I think frostworms are used more. So, or at least used like equally, I would say. So I'm not sure if this is really needed, but maybe with the other nerfs, Nova, Nerubian Tower, Ghoul nerfs, maybe this is okay. And it's not like this is a huge buff for worms anyways. The worms themselves are the same. You're just getting like 25 extra gold, and the first frostworm is 5 seconds quicker because the building builds quicker. So these are fine. It's just I wasn't sure if they were needed, but they're fine, I guess. Graveyard, quicker corpse, that's probably good. And this, I don't know what to think about. I assume this means you can essentially cast an invis potion basically on a friendly unit at the cost of the shade. But I don't know if that's good. Or I don't know what the main use of that is either. I guess it gives you the option to like use a shade to scout, and then after you're done scouting, you can use the shade to like, you can even invis a hero mid-fight or something, like invis your DK mid-fight. Maybe it opens up some micro opportunities, but it's just kind of weird to me personally. That being said, it could be cool and interesting. I do think it, like I said, if this is something you can just like use mid fight and it like can hide your Death Knight, I do wonder if that ends up really strong, because then you incentivize the undead to always keep tabs on you with shades, and then when they get in the fight, those shades that were following the enemy army now can come back to the undead army, hide your heroes if they're ever in trouble, or hide units like a worm that's getting targeted or an A-bomb that's getting targeted, and then you can run those back to your base and heal it later or whatever. it sounds very powerful, but you do still need to invest in the sacrificial pit and the shade. The shade could still just die to AoE. So yeah, it's a cool idea though. Like as far as something new. Oh yeah, friendly ground. Oh yeah, so yeah, couldn't do worms, but it could still do something like A bombs, which is huge. To be able to hide an A bomb that is pretty slow, that could be pretty huge, right? If you're able to save an A bomb with this, and then have the A bomb even cannibalize in your base or something, maybe it's kind of cool in that sense, because then you could see more A bomb play, I guess. Yeah, but I think I went through everything, right? Overall, there are still some things I personally would slightly change, but I do think these patch notes, or patch suggestions by the community and Back to Warcraft, whatever, are a playable patch, and that's important because if you look at the Blizzard patches, they are not playable patches, right? It's a fan suggestion, the Enshroud. But yeah, if you look at the Blizzard patches, you're like, yo, the first patch with the Devotion Aura and the Warden and the what was the third thing? I thought it was the Necromancers because they're getting triple buffs, including Raised Dead buff. But yeah, compared to the Blizzard patches, where like the first one had those, and then the second one still had the Raised Dead alongside Cripple and Skeletal Mastery. And yeah, and just like the crazy bash in the second version for Blizzard and so on. I think compared to those, this is actually a realistic and playable patch, and it mixes things up a bit. Like I said, personally, there's still a couple things I would slightly change, but overall, these could go through as is, and I think the game would still be playable at a reasonably balanced level, and I think that's the important part. Mix up the game while still keeping the game playable, right? So much better than the Blizzard one. Also, it would mix up the items a bit, and I think that's also important to play out again, because these do have a big effect. Like I was saying earlier, in relation to immolation, Rings of Protection disproportionately buffed Night Elf and Immolation builds with Demon Hunter than any other race, right? Like you want damage for your Archmage to defend your Expo. You want damage on the Undead to buff your Lich later. You generally want damage for the Orc as well on the Blade Master, but maybe armor if later for a TC. But even then, or potentially armor for a blade with mirror image as well. But even then, damage is still pretty good for the Orc too. But Elf, you don't really need the damage because you were relying on immolation and just kind of surviving and burning stuff down. And the DH already still did solid damage to begin with. So I like these changes to give damage back with Circlet and Claws being buffed back again and one of the rings being removed. But because this is a proposed change, I do wonder if immolation instead of 1 to 10 should still be like 1 to 5. So the activation cost at 5 instead of 10. You know, maybe it doesn't need to be nerfed that much just yet. Or they could do it 5 activation cost and keep this change, the lower level 1 immolation damage. That's my personal take, but you know, overall it's probably fine like this anyways.